Well, good morning, BronyCon. It's good to see you guys. Yeah, I hope you're having a good Sunday morning.
That's right.
Everybody.
We won't force you to do a woo.
Yeah.
Genuinely, thank you for showing up.
Yes, thank you so much for
Trust
being
me,
here.
I know how hard 10 in the morning on a Sunday is at a con. So this is Writing Comedy, How to Make Your Horses Hilarious, so I hope you've lined up for the right panel.
If you haven't, stay here anyway.
Yes,
It's going to be better than whatever you were going to.
Unless you're going to heckle us, in which case, don't.
You can handle that.
I have a very thin skin and a very fragile ego, so please don't. Anyway, yes, so writing comedy, if you read the description of the panel, it's not as easy to do as you might think it is. You guys might be here because you wanted to try writing comedy but haven't, or you've tried to write comedy but have had a lot of difficulty doing it and you're just trying to get it right, and hopefully we can provide you with some guidance. So to introduce ourselves, my name is Gary Oat from fanfiction.net. I'm probably most known for Twilight Sparkle's Not So Secret Chippic folder. Has anybody read that story? All right, 3 of you, excellent. So that's probably my most well-known comedy. I've also written a crossover of The Room and My Little Pony called The Barn. I apologize to anyone who's read that. Okay, no tomatoes have gone my way, so I guess I'm safe. And let's just start at the very far left end and go down right.
Hello, I'm totally not Brony. I've written some comedy stories. It's mostly crack. For example, A Dream, which features randomness and very long build-ups to jokes. Yeah.
All right. Hey, bud.
It's Sunday morning.
Oh, hey, good morning.
There goes my hero, watching the seacoast. My name is Aquaman. I have written a couple comedies, well, a bit less cracky, more like weed, I guess. More casual. That one, yes. There's a story about Diamond Tiara murdering OCs, which I believe I described as a bit of a satire or a kind of examination of a character. I thought it was incredible in the traditional sense. I also wrote very recently Plural Possessive, which finished, I think, 5th in the contest I entered it in. I called that character-based absurdity. And when I get a chance, I also write episode follow-ups for Equestria Daily, and my style of comedy there is literally whatever I can get away with.
Hi, good morning. My name is Skywriter. Oh, geez, that's loud. Hi, good morning. My name is Skywriter, and I have achieved a certain amount of horse fame for the comedy fix Princess Celestia Hates Tea, Twilight Sparkle Earns the Feature Box, and a story called Duplicity, which is a sort of a character-based humor. So Princess Celestia Hates Tea, more of an escalation farce. Twilight Sparkle Earns a Feature Box is a terrible metafictional story, which is now banned, I think, from FimFiction, partially because of me. It's also a story called Shipping Sickness, which is just an elaborate build-up to a terrible pun. So.
Actually, on FimFiction, when it says this is what you are and aren't allowed to post, on the do not post thing, it says metafiction, and it contains a hyperlink to that story.
Don't post stories like this one by Skywriter. It's like, okay.
I'm not kidding. Check it out.
Yeah, do.
It's there.
It's fame and infamy are two things. That's pretty good.
I'm Captain Chrysalid. I'm here mostly in a consulting manner. My two most notable comedic fix would be World of Ponycraft, which was set in World of Warcraft, which is itself pretty ridiculous. And also I wrote another Twilight Sparkle shipfic folder based on literal interpretation of the game. So yeah, I'll be here providing a little comedy insight.
All right, I'm a bag of Vicodin. I have written a few different comedy fics, such as My Little Diamond, which was kind of a spoof and a satire on My Little Dashie and the popularity that came with that. The Colbert Report as well, which, as you can imagine, is just the Colbert Report in ponies. And then I also recently wrote a story called Princess Diamond Tiara, where I replaced Spike in the Princess Spike episode with Diamond Tiara and had a lot of fun with that.
So now that we've introduced ourselves, do you want to go down the line and just explain a little bit of the thought process behind our stories?
I take bits and pieces from wherever I can find it. This could be just every day I hear a joke and I write it down. Maybe something my wife said, something we were watching on TV. Friday morning, Skywriter had a little bit of a stutter in his speech, and he said posthumously. And I thought that's a great idea for a story. Also, yeah, pop culture references, things like that.
First of all, or what, are you done?
Bits and pieces from everywhere.
I was just say, first of all, I'm flattered you think there's a method to my madness. That's cool. And that's a little bit truthful. I don't plan a whole lot of things out. I'm not really that way where I'm looking at things constantly and trying to figure out what might make a good joke later. A lot of it is just along the course of naturally writing a story, I'll have ideas of where I could take something absurd or make something a little bit unexpected, I guess. And that's really where I would consider most comedy to come from. It's taking something and making it unexpected. And then after that, it's just timing. So that's all something that you can work on without necessarily having to watch for every little thing that's happening and really focus on it. It's just kind of an instinct that you can develop and just start watching for things like that in real life and then when you're just writing a story naturally.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth behind that. What I do, it really depends on the fic. With the barn, obviously, I just said, why don't I just take this and put them together? It's not a really good example of a parody, but it's just so absurd that it kind of works. But sometimes I come up with a big joke and I say, okay, this is going to be my fic, but those fics don't usually have too many words to them, so I just come up with that and then just try and build up to that, execute it, and then that's it. That's like the linchpin joke. If no one gets that joke, then it's not funny. With Not So Secret Chippick Folder, that was written for a contest. It was Everfree's Iron Author 2014. So what happens is you have 2 hours to write a story, and then they say, okay, you have these prompts, go. And I just had to whip out my laptop and throw it together in 2 hours. And I just thought, okay, what's the most absurd situation I can think of? And this is right when Twilight Sparkle's Secret Chippick Folder, the game, premiered. So that was on everyone's minds. Everyone had decks out. It was like the thing. So I just said, all right, I'll just do this. And because I know the pony characters so well, and this is a piece of advice all of you guys can use, is just say, okay, think of a situation, put the characters in there, what would they do, and then just kind of let it write itself, because the characters come alive, and the ponies are their personalities are so multifaceted and so complex that if you put them in a situation, there is going to be some type of clash or some type of opportunity for comedy. All you need is to have a situation absurd enough to make the comedy happen. And thus it wasn't forced, and that's why I think it was fairly well received by almost everyone who read it. Except for people who said I really suck at making Spike, or portraying Spike because he was really out of character, some people say. It was just a mean streak of his, though.
One of the things that I use to mine for comedy is trope subversion or inversion, which is to say, look at something that everyone is doing, everyone is taking for granted, and that you see in the crowd of the fics that you read. See something that people are doing, possibly even without questioning it, and then turn that concept on its head and make it sort of a ridiculous one. That's sort of what led to Princess Celestia Hates Tea, this concept of after reading like my fifth story where all Princess Celestia does is drink tea and regard tax policy, which I don't know, tax policy is a thing with Princess Celestia. I don't know, everybody's doing that. But I mean, it's just like, you say, you know, what if she's actually not really enjoying it? What if she's just actually just doing it just because it looks good, and then it just becomes a seed of an idea that just blossoms into something completely ridiculous, so.
She's a princess. She doesn't have any responsibility.
She has no responsibility whatsoever.
I don't think Equestria has taxes.
But no, they have horse taxes. Of course they have horse taxes.
Her only responsibility is flying to the castle.
Having very pretty wings. So, I've heard a lot about, and you guys have talked a bunch about, the sort of spontaneous comedy, which I think is probably what I write mostly. It's where usually you're writing a serious story. It's not about comedy, but you have the opportunity to slip some comedy in. And that's, I think, a very important skill to have as a writer in general, because it helps lighten the mood. It might get a little chuckle out of the reader while they're still engrossed in what the character's problems are or what the character's doing. Usually this comes out of a Pinkie Pie or a Rainbow Dash moment. And then there's the more concentrated comedy fic. These are the ones which will usually have the comedy tag on filmfiction.net. And these are usually premise-based. And for a short story of mine, I'll use as an example Rainbow Dash and the Mare Witch, which is Just Rainbow Dash cooking what she wants to be a man witch, but having absolutely no skills in cooking, and so making one terrible cooking error after another and not even realizing it until the whole thing just comes out as mush, and then she takes out food again. So, and that's an example of a simple sort of premise that's comedic from the get-go, from start to finish, and the whole point of the story is comedy. Very different than the kind of spontaneous improv comedy which you might slip into an otherwise serious fic. And there's, I think, a little bit of a slightly different art to both, because one you do have to plan for, the other one can certainly just pop into your head and be like, that's good, I'll just stick that in. So hopefully we'll cover both.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, one of my most recent stories, Doomsday Arcade, I had a lot of fun with writing Discord just because he can kind of be like Pinkie Pie insofar as he has a lot of references that he could pull out of nowhere because he's just that wacky. But when it came to the Colbert Report, that one was easy comedically just because I've watched every single episode since like 2007, so it was easy to just research and then figure out the style. And I also follow a lot of stand-up comedians, and you can, you know, like every time one comes up on Netflix, I always look at them because you can kind of see what their style is insofar as like looking at something and flipping it on its head, like one of them mentioned, or looking at something and just figuring out one-liner jokes, which are my favorite. But it's really easy to just kind of go into the type of style that you want to do, but at the same time you can kind of do more because like in one of the stories I did references and then one-liner jokes, and it kind of, the show does that too.
You know, really good stand-up comics are almost the best thing to watch, and that's because there's a point at which they become more than just comics. I think the best way I've heard it phrased is that a good stand-up comedian tells jokes, and a great one tells a story in a way that it's funny. So I think the best example that comes to mind immediately is Louis C.K.
Yes.
Nothing Louis C.K. says individually, if you just put it on a paper, is that funny, but his method of storytelling, his style, is such that he's one of the best comedians on the circuit right now. And that's the point he's gotten to, is he's reached that level where he's not just straight up telling a joke, it's the timing and the phrasing and everything that plays into the story he's telling that makes it funny.
Absolutely true. Once you start writing and practicing, you sort of develop your own voice and figure out your timing and just little nuances that help amp up the joke.
So this is a good point to transition into why should we write comedy? There's a quick little list I'd like to go through, and we can just ping pong ideas around for a couple minutes. But laughter is the best medicine, I like to say. You know, when you're feeling upset, what do you want to do? You want to go watch something funny or do something funny. And like the Pony Show, that helped with a lot of people. One reason why is it's just funny. And speaking of ponies, pretty much every single episode of My Little Pony it's got comedy in it, even though not all of them would be tagged as comedy if they were to be converted into a fan fiction and posted on FimFic. Like some of the episodes definitely are like straight up comedies, but there are the darker episodes. But even in the darker episodes, they lighten the mood with some jokes all the time. And comedy, it's also one of the hardest forms of writing. And one of the reasons why we've already kind of covered this indirectly is that it relies a lot on verbal timing and, you know, delivery, tone of voice, and, you know, also facial expression, all that sort of stuff, like all this physical stuff that you don't have access to when you write it down. So you kind of have to change your mode of thinking as opposed to say if you're a stand-up comedian or what have you. But it's incredibly rewarding when you can pull it off and make people laugh with just words alone, because I think that's the hardest form of comedy to execute. And finally, comedy has, it's historically been used to convey serious messages, so you can be very serious with comedy. The reason why is I think comedy, it kind of lets your guard down, and you can try and make a really solid point with whatever you're writing about. And people will actually think about that and kind of absorb it into them. Also, back in the really old days, the only person who could make fun of the king to his face without getting his head lopped off was the court jester, and the court jester could use comedy to tell the king what he's doing wrong.
You could also make fun of the king if you were an invading knight, but you had to lop the king's head off first.
Yeah.
That was difficult.
Right before you lop his head off, you're just, hey.
Yeah, lots of head puns, well, some of them not appropriate, so.
But yeah, comedy,
I'm ahead of you today.
Yeah.
Comedy is pretty
You're on a
universal.
roll.
PG.
Yeah, comedy's pretty universal. We mentioned court jesters hundreds of years ago. but even babies know how to smile and laugh.
Unlike bronies.
Yeah. Well, to go on a little example,
Wow.
who thinks Pinky is best pony?
Wow, look at all
Okay,
the
for
wrong
everyone
people.
else,
That's not how you spell Rainbow Dash.
For everyone else, you're probably not giggling over every little thing and making people look at you weird in public because, we've got to all have our serious face. But, alone, late at night, in front of your computer, everyone likes to have a little fun. And for that, we have comedy.
I don't think you were talking about comedy.
Hey, I wrote
right.
I wrote it down ahead of time so I could tell that joke that way. Don't you undercut it.
See, timing.
I find comedy to be particularly valuable as just a means of altering or trying to control the mood of the reader. Because, and this is something you don't usually think about when you're writing, but there are times when you want to evoke strong emotion in the reader. And sometimes, I guess you could call it a cheap way, but Austin said call it an easy or efficient way of doing this, is to sometimes lighten the mood very quickly and then you can get back to the seriousness. That's a relief in one sense, but it also heightens the mood when you go from one high or one low or one low to one high. And that's an easier way of making a funnier scene funnier or a dramatic scene more dramatic. So it has a practical role as well as simply being entertaining. And I think in a more anecdotal way, that people tend to read fics that aren't, completely serious or even aren't completely jokey. People like to have a mix of reactions in a story and say, that was pretty hilarious, and then, there was this nice part in the middle too, which, wasn't funny, but I felt for the character. Or in a serious fic, it could be like, well, this was all seriousness and stuff, but there was a little bit that lightened the mood, and that helped. And that helps retain readership, which is, of course, also important.
Yeah, you mentioned anecdotes. Tom Clancy is not known as a comedy writer.
Not the
But
way I read them.
but once or twice per story, he would put in a little anecdote, something that he had picked up from talking to military people that was funny, that just happened to complement the situation at hand.
My reason for writing comedy is mostly selfish, just because I really like writing stuff that is funny. So when you think about just going back to a story that you've written, if you can really say, if you can make yourself laugh more than once, like after you go after the first draft and everything, as long as it's not completely, like a Colbert Report joke from November 2008 that everyone would be like, why is that in there? Then you can most likely make everyone else laugh with it too, because either the timing is really good or it just hits you out of nowhere. And even if you can do that more than once, then you have a really good joke or at least a good lead for what the story is going to go into.
Anyone have anything else to add to that?
We can get going on. Yeah,
Save it for the next section.
let's keep going.
Well, along
We're
with
gonna need
that,
somebody to stand up here and do jumping jacks for the entire panel.
with
Go for it.
That doesn't work.
I just wanted to add one more thing about characterization because, in the previous panels, short, long, and epic, and all of those, we spoke about, characterization and how you can use it in order to have people feel for your character, especially when you're using OCs and stuff. And, the character's sense of humor is a really good way to characterize them because there's a lot of jokes, throughout the world, like Fluttershy would never laugh, or, in the one episode where Rainbow is going to joke Pinky, or Fluttershy, and Pinky says, as long as the joke isn't hurtful in any way, then that's a really good joke. And I think that's a really good character trait because, you can see that Pinky is not just making jokes out of nowhere. She's not being random for the lull. She has a place where she stops. And that's, I think, a really good place to have characterization in that manner.
I guess you wouldn't get along well with Courage, the insult comedian dog.
Were we talking the cartoon?
Yeah, no, I meant the original one. The puppet man.
Am I too young for this?
Boy, I guess so. Come on, Courage. Hilarious. But yeah, insult comedy is obviously a thing.
Greg Giraldo?
Some love it, some hate it. But But it just goes to show there's many different styles of comedy. And I'm sure we've all seen comedians or heard of comedians where they rip into the audience. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's a legitimate type of comedy. Pinkie Pie obviously wouldn't be too much of a fan of it, mm-hmm. but it is a legitimate type of comedy. It shows that there's a large number of ways you can get people to laugh. Of course, can't really do that with written comedy quite so much. Can't make fun of your reader.
I tried to do that in My Little Diamond.
They won't read it.
Yeah, well, yeah. You kind of, with My Little Diamond, which is basically My Little Dashie, but Diamond Tiara is the one who's in the box. And so basically the main character takes Diamond Tiara home and immediately regrets it because she's just like, why don't you have caviar of the highest quality? Why are you giving me rice and Cheerios? Like, just stuff like that. And the guy's like a 21-year-old Brony college student. He's like, this is all I have in my tears. Do you want those as well? Like, it's just... it's just, you know, because we're aware of the demographic that we have, you know, I can see the people that are in this panel, and, you know, you can kind of just roll with that. And, you know, if you can pull punches at, you know, your demographic and people can laugh along with you, then that's also the sign of a really good story.
What we're really getting at there is you can poke fun at your own audience as long as you're not punching down.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the biggest rules of comedy is don't punch down.
Yes.
And what that means is we can kind of make fun of bronies here because we are bronies. We know exactly what we're talking about. We do this just as much as anyone in this room does. But what would be something different is if we weren't brony. If we were, for some reason, here and we weren't bronies, for us to make fun of bronies at that point, that would be, I guess, considered punching down because we would be portraying ourselves, being not bronies, as better than bronies.
Well, like Howard Stern, for example.
I was just about to say Howard
Stern. Yeah, because we've had a significant amount of backlash just throughout the fandom from all of these people who are, you know, obviously not bronies, who just decide to make jokes or decide to take shots, and either the joke isn't that good, or they just aren't or people say that they don't have, you know, the context of being a brony. They'll be like, you never watched a show. What are you aware of?
Yeah. And it's why you don't make jokes about people with physical or mental disabilities, why you don't make jokes about, you know, people who are in poverty, anything along those lines. You're punching down. Mm-hmm. So you make jokes about politicians and rich people and everything like that, everybody who is above or at the same level as you. And so that's a great way to just not offend anybody, first of all. Mm-hmm. But it makes it relatable because nobody wants to be the person who's laughing at someone below them. Everyone wants to look up and say, in mocking them, say, well, you know, they kind of do have some cool things going for them, or at the very least, I associate with that, and I can sort of laugh at myself.
So that's why everyone was shouting Donald Trump at the VIP Mad Libs yesterday.
Yeah.
I was one of the people shouting Donald Trump, don't worry.
Well, I did talk about not mocking people with mental disabilities.
Wow. Shots fired.
Your move, Trump.
He's watching this right now
Twitter.
and thinking,
He's
why, Aqua?
He's going to buy the con and cancel the panel.
That would be the greatest thing ever for Donald Trump to get on Twitter and call me a dickhead. Me personally.
Yeah.
Well, I think we all, where we're listening to somebody that we respect with comedy, we kind of want to be talked to a little bit. That's where referring to your audience comes in. Mm-hmm. Getting a little recognition from somebody that you may consider above you is gratifying. So that's why everybody probably had a little freak out when episode Slice of Life aired.
Yeah, Slice of Life was definitely a parody, and we've already pretty much covered the whole section on the forms comedy can take. And to sort of restate the obvious, parodies need to be loving, like, you know, think Slice of Life, think Spaceballs. Those are loving parodies of things, and we've kind of already covered that with, you know, poking fun and not punching down. We've already basically covered satires. We've already covered comic relief and dark and tragedy things. So the thing I think this is mostly basically basic comedic theory. And basic comedic theory is the power of contrast. If you have comedy contrasting a dark moment, then it becomes more powerful and vice versa. You need light to contrast dark to make the dark stronger, or what have you, depending on what you're going for. Because if you just had something that's completely dark all the way through, you'll kind of get inoculated. And same with comedy. Like, if you're writing a comedy fic, you don't want to just say, okay, I have to do a joke every single paragraph. If you do, it's going to get old really fast, and it won't work in anything beyond, like, I don't know, 1 page. And like, look, let's use Shakespeare as an example. All of his comedies, they started out really sad before they got funny. And, you know, like, there has to be that contrast. And also tragedies. His tragedies started out pretty good, and then they just went dark and just went down. So with that, we should probably go into common pitfalls, like a lot of don'ts with comedy. Who wants to start us off with that?
Well, the joke itself is important. It's the way it's told. We mentioned earlier live comedians that tell their stories, and how they tell it is just as important as what they're saying.
Yeah, that goes. There's a physicality to, physical comedy, to someone standing up on a stage and telling jokes or telling a story. And there is a way to incorporate that into a written work, but it's a very different experience. You can't go out and just describe someone as he was walking really sillily. Like, it was a really silly walk. There was a whole place full of people doing silly walks. It doesn't work. The whole point of that Monty Python sketch is you can see them doing the silly walk. It's purely physical. So there's a big difference between doing something physical and just having it shown, and being able to write something happening, even in a physical way, that's still funny. I think one of the comedic parts early on in Plural Possessive is the fact that while Sombra's very early possessing Dinky, her response to that is to punch herself in the face, because she doesn't know what's going on and she wants to get whatever's in her head out. So it's a very physical comedic moment. If there had been somehow a filmed version of it, there wouldn't have had to be any explanation. It could have just shown her punching herself in the face and switching back and forth between their two personalities. But in the course of it, the comedy doesn't come from just her punching him. It's coming from Sam's reaction to technically himself punching himself in the face. So there's this absurdity to it. He sort of acknowledges this absurdity while trying to combat it. And that whole unexpected situation is what's comedic in a written sense, not necessarily just the physical part.
One of the big don'ts I have is do not force it. If you force it, it's not going to be funny. That's the same thing with anything in writing. If you try and force anything in writing, it's usually not going to work and have the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve. And that sort of goes back to what I did to write Not So Secret Chipfic Folder, is I just sort of said, okay, this is the situation, what jokes can happen, and I sort of just went along, oh, this is an opportunity, I'll put one here, or I just thought of something that made me genuinely laugh, and then I'll put that in there, and that's just kind of what I did. I made it as organic as possible, and yeah, organic comedy, I think, goes a real long way.
And that's a good segue into punchline stories, which
Yes.
do exist. They are possible to do well.
Skywriter's done a bunch of them.
Skywriter doesn't like to talk about the ones he's done. Actually, one of my personal favorites, if any of you have read Oscar Wilde, which I hope most of you have, because everyone who hasn't is missing out. One of his plays is called The Importance of Being Earnest, and that entire play is a build-up to one pun at the end of the story. It's entirely possible to do it, it just can't be the singular focus. There's a whole story that has to happen beforehand, and then you can end on the pun and make people realize that this is literally the only reason any of this exists.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the hilarity of it, because they can imagine the author being like, they think of this one pun, and they're like, you know what, let's put another like 50,000 words beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, that contributes to the absurdity of it. It's the highest level of absurdity, is this is an entire story that exists purely to build up to this thing.
Yeah, that goes back to how you tell the joke. I once made a Forrest Gump reference in one of my stories, but the build up to that took 3 chapters and introduced an entirely new character who got run over by a tank and suffered multiple amputation, just just so somebody could say, "Lieutenant Dandy, you got new legs."
That's wow.
Yeah, I'm not really that funny in real life.
No, the key to comedy is horrifically crippling people. Just take away some limbs and roll with it.
Yeah, but
that's all you can do with no limbs left.
Yeah, well, you know, roll.
Thank you. We'll be here all week.
You have to identify your own style.
You notice how much we broke our own rule about punching down?
Yeah. You have to identify your own style. I don't have quick enough wit to be a funny person, but I have sort of a living document that I keep, that if I think of a joke, I'll write it down, and at some point in the future, maybe I can use it. And if you have a joke that you have an idea for, you can spend a lot of time building up, like writing an entire play for one pun. I myself have a pun in the oven now that
No, everyone
I-
pause and laugh.
For that one.
It sounds half-baked.
I started the build up in July, and I plan to have a payoff in January. So, and the joke itself may not be all that funny, but if you can't amaze them with
that's
brilliant
where-
styles and
that's
with
where we're going
dedication.
with them.
Oh, for those wondering, we will be doing questions at the very end. Sure.
Yeah, it'll be
We have a standing mic.
which
We'll be
means-
lining up for that. I'll let everyone know when we'll take questions.
A common pitfall that I see in writing is I follow the sketch comedy trio called Loading Ready Run, and they have really good sketch comedy. And one of their advice is that a lot of their jokes are based on having either odd characters in normal situations or normal characters in odd situations. And the pitfall that I see is people putting odd characters in odd situations, because then there's no frame of reference. Because if you're not on the real world, like if gravity was upside down and there are odd people who are just accepting gravity or thinking that it's odd, people would be like, what kind of world is this?
And I mean, I think that segues into a point that I kind of wanted to make, and that's to say that what humor does mostly is it allows you to see truth more clearly, see the reality of a situation, and sees to express the characters in a way that's surprising and new, and yet is recognizable at the same time. And I think that that's the delicate balance, and that's the really hard thing about comedy, is that you're trying to both show people something that they recognize and say, oh, that's so Pinkie Pie, but also to show it in a way that's new and different that they never expected to do it before. I mean, because you can vary too much on either side of this divide. You can be pure referential humor, which is, I would say, is more along the lines of the endless stream of the epic movie, disaster movie things, just with the X movie things. They're just sort of joylessly referencing things.
Scary
It's
movie
like,
and stuff like that.
Yeah, things like that. It's like oh yeah, that's a reference. I recognize that. And then on the other hand, there's delight. So they're trying to surprise and delight people with having no real world reference, and that's clowns, which are obviously scary. So we have clowns. You don't recognize anything real about them. They're just trying to be surprising, delighting, and sort of in that. But there's no grounding in anything real because they're deliberately sort of a artificial personality. And I think finding the middle ground, allowing you to say, oh, I never thought about it that way before, but that's absolutely correct. That's sort of the keystone of one type of comedy. There are no real rules of comedy, but I think that's what a good type.
Louis C.K.
So,
does that really well.
Yeah.
So we're starting to run out of time a
Yeah,
little bit, so
we
we're going to have to move right along into general tips. But two things I wanted to cover before we do that is know the difference of random versus random. There's a lot of random humor, and I love random humor. I'm basically a living ball of random humor. But there has to be kind of a method to the madness, even if it's not readily apparent. Everything has to be there for a reason. And yes, you can be absurd, but you really need to think it through, and you can't just sort of just randomly put a joke in. It's not going to be funny. Like, it has to be random but not random. And beyond that, like, just writing Pinkie Pie is really, really hard. So you really have to study, let's look at Pinkie Pie, right? We've got Swarm of the Century. She's being random but not random because there's a whole point to what she's doing for the entirety of that. And also Pinkie and Party Pooped. That's a lot of good random Pinkie humor that actually works.
The easiest way to sum that up is internal logic.
Yeah, internal logic.
And this is something that I feel like Monty Python especially does well, is they create this inherently absurd situation, but then they play through with it. So there's no acknowledging that it's an absurd situation. There's no winking at the camera or anything like that. They take a completely ridiculous premise and then play it through to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, it
so
never
once
goes off the
you've
rails.
established the rules, then you play it straight. But when you're in the process of establishing those rules, you can do whatever you want.
I'll add as a tip, one of the advantages a lot of the things we're mentioning have, most face-to-face comedians, including what we're doing and our banter, is that we can control the flow and the pace of the story. Because timing is very important for comedy, especially the occasional pause, the lead-in, and then followed by punchline, that sort of thing. You can't really do that with writing. You don't know how fast someone's going to read what you write. You don't know if they're going to skip around slightly. So it leads to a lot of difficulty on the part of the writer, or particular difficulty for the writer in comedy, of trying to control the pace of the flow. And to an extent, there's just a lot of experimenting that you need to do whether you handle it in terms of format. I sometimes use format options. You can break up sentences. You can use the narrative to force a pause where there otherwise wouldn't be one. You can physically separate the joke on a different level, because when most people are reading and they move from one paragraph to the next, they subconsciously pause for about half a second to a second. So there are a couple tricks you can do to try and get the timing down. And the timing, I think, really helps, especially when you're dealing with randomness. Randomness is another problem, especially in this fandom, because let's face it, MLP is a pretty zany, hectic, random type of fandom to be in. That's just the setting that we're working with. When I did the Voyage to the Center of the Shipfic folder,
Good jumping jack guy.
and I knew part of the challenge was that it was so innately random. I had no idea what was going to happen as the story progressed, because I wrote it literally based on what happened in the cards of the game. And
See, timing.
So I couldn't plan ahead, and I didn't want to plan ahead because I felt that that would ruin the spirit of the thing. A lot of the fun in Twilight Sparkle Shipwreck folder is you never know what's going to happen, though. Pretty much inevitably there's going to be some Apple family shenanigans. Twilight is going to do something very, very wrong. Things of that nature.
It's not creepy.
Yeah, it's not creepy. That's just the way the goal cards are.
That's probably my favorite goal.
Yeah, and of course her relentless hunt for Celestia.
Yep.
So you know that there's going to be some crazy stuff going on, but you don't know exactly what. And some cards that you really were hoping might show up might not show up at all. And so it was literally the most random and one of the more difficult fics that I had to write simply because of that. And it forced me to use a lot of the tools that I had learned from other stories to be able to pull it off. And my God, to make a coherent story out of it at the very end, somehow, even though it involved a lot of Twilight and Deus Ex Machina and yeah.
We're doing general
So
tips,
for
right?
Yeah, then
so
general
for
tips.
so
Okay.
for tips, like one of my big tips, sorry, we just got to keep moving along here, is I like to say you winnie some, you lose some, and the reason why.
Pause for the laugh.
Yeah. See, I think
He
I
calls
just lost
that
one right
comedy.
there. But so what the whole point is, you need to learn how to weigh your gags, because since comedy is a very subjective thing, not everyone is going to find the same jokes funny, and it's okay if people don't get half the jokes in your fic, and
Like we
or they
just
don't
did.
like half the jokes in your fic. It's okay. But there are a few linchpin jokes that absolutely have to work, that if people don't laugh at those, your fic will fail for them, and that's just going to happen with comedy, and you have to learn to accept this. So what you have to do is make it as best as you can to have the highest chance of success with the audience, and if a few of those big linchpin jokes work, people will say your fic works even if they don't like the other half of the random, like they're kind of like throwaway gags. Right, like in my not so secret shipfic folder, one of the throwaway gags I had was Spike was selling Twilight's shipfics in the marketplace, and Fluttershy buys one. She reads it because she's like, "Oh, it's a shipfic. We'll buy one and find out." She buys one. She's like, "This is the most horrible, most disgusting thing I've ever seen. Is there more?" And then she buys like half a dozen more. But it's okay if people don't laugh at that. A lot of people do, but it's not mandatory that people do in order for the story to keep moving along. So you need to learn weight with your gags.
There's also running gags. I don't know if you guys write many running gags. I love them.
Archer is really good at running gags.
Archer has running gags like over the course of seasons.
So
Yeah.
Just for as an example, when I wrote my thing, Trixie came up as a card. And she ended up getting bounced all over the place. And just by coincidence, she ended up getting bounced in all the places Twilight would want to be. So she was shipped with all the princesses. She was shipped with, Star Swirl, the bearded, and all this stuff. So Twilight, who's the premise of the fic is Twilight's writing the fic and in the fic, is constantly expressing frustration and incredulity at the fact that Trixie is getting all of this stuff. And Trixie, of course, is just a raging narcissist who's going on about the great and powerful Trixie is not surprised that all of these princesses are fawning over her. And all of that. So that's just a running joke. Trixie constantly getting what Twilight herself wants.
Yeah, and speaking in a more general sense about comedy, one of the things, again, that's most commonly quoted, I guess, is the rule of three. And I don't know if you've heard of this before. It's a bit of a misnomer. What it means is that you can tell a joke 3 times before it's not funny anymore. And it doesn't mean you tell the same joke 3 times. It means you have a variant of the joke and a variant of the joke, and then you move on. One of the best examples I've ever seen of this is Whose Line's It Anyway? The guys are professionals at one of them making a funny joke at first, then they'll wait a little bit, one of them will make a callback to that joke, and then one of them will take the joke to its logical extreme for the 3rd time, and then they're done. So that's what we're talking about when we say running jokes. You can have that running joke that exists within a single chapter or episode or what have you, and you can make those callbacks, but 3 is generally the magic number and the point where you can go ahead and move on.
To expand on the rule of 3, it's a really basic. It's one of the 2 real basic comedy tricks. Is you do something once, okay, do something again. Now the audience has an expectation. Now do the same thing again, then turn it on its head, and then suddenly that's funny because you've just destroyed an expectation that you just set up. Another big one for me is the odd couple, and it's actually probably the easiest way to get into writing comedy, and that's what the odd couple is. You have 2 people with different personalities, throw them in a situation and see what happens. And that's really easy with ponies because they have such complex personalities, as I said before. All you have to do is, like, any pony pairing can work, and it's going to be funny as long as the situation is such that it will create a personality clash between the 2.
Well, there were a bunch of episodes like that in season 1 to start
yeah.
with, first of all, like Look Before You Sleep.
Yep.
Yeah, and it follows into our own fan-made content. Where does Vinyl, Scratch, and Octavia come from? And heck, Lyra and Bon Bon also have aspects of that. It's always
Derby
kind of
and the
the
Doctor.
Yeah.
Hoobs.
Yep.
No, that's just canon.
The Doctor Hoobs.
It is canon. M.A. Larson said episode 100 is canon.
Okay.
Thanks, M.A. Larson. So if no one else has any other points to make, then we can open this up to Q&A. And Q&A will be line up at the mic.
Yeah. Mike.
Oh, it was Voyage to the Center of the Shipwreck folder. Captain Chrysalid. I'm pretty much the only Chrysalid around. There are a few
Other than me,
captains.
whenever someone asks for the author name, just say Penstroke. It's just me. It doesn't matter.
I'm Penstroke.
I'm Penstroke.
That's
We're
your
all
Pen-
Penstroke.
Everyone
Yeah.
is your Penstroke. The entirety of fanfiction is just him.
Good for you.
When the Centurions come in and they look for Penstroke, we'll defend him.
And then Penstroke in the audience is like, what are
And
you
then we'll
guys
kind of
doing?
Yeah.
get him.
We can do that first question now.
Get him, Lanius.
Yeah.
Hi. For all of you, what's funnier to you, good comedy or bad drama?
They're funny for different ways.
Yeah.
So essentially,
Well, it depends on whether the drama knows it's bad.
Yeah, like I'd
That's
rather take a Louis C.K. special over like a terrible soap
Sharknado?
opera.
yeah, like, and I would argue against it. The reason that things like The Room and Sharknado are funny, honestly, is because they're sincere. Like, there's a point in The Room where The Room is such a terrible movie in every aspect, and the reason it's funny and fun to watch is because it is terrible in literally every aspect, even though someone was genuinely trying, supposedly, to make a good film. So it's a little bit like Punching Down, and you don't want to like just openly mock it in front of the person, but there is an inherent absurdity to watching something like that. And that's the difference between bad drama and good comedy. Bad drama, both are still sincere. There's just one doesn't work out, and the other is an intentional but sincere way of going about it.
When I think
I
of the
honestly
worst,
like them both.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
I was about to say, when I think of the worst bad drama, it actually comes to mimetic Superboy Prime, where he's like, "I'll kill you to death." And when I read that, I'm like, did they do that on purpose? I don't know.
That's really the key for bad dramas. Like, you can't really tell if they did it on purpose.
It's when a film tries to be like The Room that it sucks, because it's like, okay, I'm going to try and make this film so bad it's good on purpose. Then that's when it falls flat on its face. It either needs to be really bad, like so bad it's good, or just good comedy, and they're both equally as good. I mean, I'm writing a fic called The Wicker Man, and you can probably guess what that's about.
No, it's about basket weaving.
So the original character do not steal, it's a black and white element. Everybody see. Oh God.
You mean this?
That's our next question.
Next question.
I notice a lot when they try to make comedy, they try to take a character, but when that character do that particular action, it doesn't make sense. For example, Applejack tying someone up with a lasso, that would make sense to me as far as comedy, because that matches what something that she might do. So my question to you is, how often do you see jokes that they take a character that has nothing to do with their personality, it seems like something they would never do. They try to throw a joke at it, either just falls flat or it might hit because it's just so random. Like Pinkie Pie would make sense because she's random, but let's say if this was Rarity, for example, it wouldn't make sense.
Depending on where you look on fanfiction, there are a lot of stories about people tying up Applejack with their own lasso.
Well,
And quite a few of them are Rarity.
PG panel.
yeah,
PG
but
panel.
That panel was 2 years ago.
yeah, random is best handled as an exaggeration of what makes sense, rather than simply throwing in something random. For example, Pinky going to Yakistan. A lot of crazy stuff happened along the way, but it's still a simple journey, just cranked up to 11.
Well, and to give an honest answer to it, it would actually be funny if Rarity was trying to lasso somebody because it's something you don't expect. Like I can imagine that in itself being a comedy. Applejack trying to teach Rarity how to use a lasso.
And I think the important thing is not the situation that the characters find themselves in, but that they do it in such a characteristic way, and they can be doing a characteristic way and doing it in a characteristic Rarity way. So Rarity, for example, lassoing, but doing it in a very Rarity so fashion. So worrying about making sure that her rope is not of raw hemp and should be this imported silk rope that she's lassoing first. So I mean, it can be. It's exposing the truth of a character, even though they're in a bizarre situation that you would never find them in. So it can work.
It's like if they're both somehow competing at the same rodeo, and Rarity comes out in like the rhinestone cowboy thing, looking totally terrible, and Applejack is just staring like, what are you doing? And then it finally comes to the lasso, and she's like, oh, I forgot I don't know how to lasso.
Yes.
Yeah, if she just did a lasso exactly like Applejack and it went off without a hitch and it was exactly like that, then it would fall flat on its face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You have a chance right there when you're having someone do something that's like completely different from what their character is. You're pretty much walking on thin ice right there, because one slip and they become not their character. But another slip and they're completely hilarious because they are their character, but they're also trying to be something else, and there can be absurdity within that. Like, that was the entire point of Simple Ways, when Rarity and Applejack were trying to be each other. That was hilarious.
Or at least mostly Rarity was trying to be Applejack.
Yeah, definitely. But you can see how when you do that, or things along that nature, it can just glide to a finish line and be excellent.
Alrighty, thank you.
All right, first off to Aquaman, what is the most important aspect of comedy? And you asked me to tell you that.
Dank memes.
Okay, you messed up that joke, so it wasn't funny. That was your fault. Anyway, you asked me to say that the other day.
Never mind.
Okay.
Thank you for trying.
Hey, A for effort, all right? Now, my actual question is, it's been said that it's really hard to critique comedy because it's so subjective that at the end of the day, all you can really say is variations of it's not funny. So how do you bring proper criticism and critique to a comedy that doesn't work? Or that because other people may think something is hilarious. There's, for example, I mean, every other week there's some new hot meme story going on that everyone thinks is hilarious, but some people don't. How do you actually level objective criticism against a comedy?
Have you tried telling these people that they're wrong? That's all I got.
What I like to do is, what I think would be best for that is you want to kind of analyze the jokes and break them down and then say why they didn't work for you. That way, even if you're wrong in the case that, because it's very subjective, as has been said many times, even if you're not exactly right, people can sort of say, okay, I see where this guy is coming from and I can understand why he would say that, and that would hopefully provide some insight.
Well, a lot, even like Louis C.K., who we've been talking about as being like an excellent stand-up comedian, has had blunders in the past just because he punched down, as Aqua mentioned, and that's kind of the point of of a bunch of stand-up comedians going on tour, is because they're refining their jokes from punching down all the way down here to like maybe in the middle or maybe up top. Because, obviously, like Aqua said, you don't make jokes about mentally disabled people, but I can think of a few that Louis has done that just with the right planning and the right storytelling that have just completely made me burst out laughing, and the entire audience as well.
Well, there's a reason also a lot of comedians do self-depreciating humor.
Yes, exactly.
So they can
Because
punch everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. So if the comedian can like make himself down here, it's way easier to punch up at people that are slightly lower, because like Louis' whole shtick is that he's a divorced loser dad, and he can make fun of all these people that have like, actual good lives and like picket fences with like all of the, like a house that doesn't have a mortgage on it, like stuff like that.
Oh, my turn. Okay. My question is about specific comedy genres. Does it just have to be like a regular comedy, or can it be a musical, or can it be dark, or can it be slapstick? Can it be anything that is just regular comedy, or does it just has to be just comedy alone?
You're saying, do these things exist? Yes, they absolutely
I think,
exist.
I think any of those are good, but slapstick comedy is very difficult in a written form.
Yeah, also musicals.
And musicals are just
Unless you
difficult
have
in
somebody
general.
hooked up to make the songs
Yeah,
for you.
unless you have someone making a song
for it.
for your fic, then musicals are practically impossible.
Start with the buddy fix. Those are,
Yeah.
those are, I think, the easiest and the best things to kind of cut your teeth on.
Because it's the easiest already made setup, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can rely a lot on dialogue. Just good dialogue can carry a lot of the comedy.
Or like I said, do odd character in a normal situation. So like I'll be quick. In My Little Diamond, I had the story take place in Portland, Oregon, which if people have watched Portlandia, they kind of get immediately what it's going for. Because what happens is the main character takes Diamond Tiara to a supermarket in order to buy her food. And the greeter is like, oh yeah, we have all the Toys Kids in, aisle 36. And then the person's like, Toys Kids? And the greeter's like, oh yeah, you have an interdimensional pony kid right in front of your cart right there. And that's, the kid aisle is over there. And then the entire town is just basically that. It's just people accepting that this guy just all of a sudden has a pony kid, and he's just like, no!
He wants someone to be shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question.
What is your advice on how to intentionally capture the styles of comedy that are normally unintentional? Like I Have Argon style comedy.
How to intentionally do that?
I don't know if you can intentionally do
Capture
that.
something
I mean,
unintentional.
the closest thing I've done is The Barn, but that was basically emulating The Room to the point where it's not a true parody. I'm trying to make The Wicker Man work by having a similar type of story, but it's just played out differently enough that it can kind of work. It's really tough to do because most of the time when you say, all right, I'm going to make a movie and I'm going to make it exactly like The Room, it's probably not going to work because if you actually know what you're doing making a film, you're not going to make a film like The Room. Actually, in my script writing classes, I'm a university student for writing, by the way, in my first year, one of my professors, what he does is early on in the semester, he shows his class The Room and says, this is how you don't make a film. I'm not kidding.
And that's what's, like, it's such a perfect example of literally every single thing you can do wrong making a film. So to be able to intentionally emulate that, you would have to naturally do every single thing possible wrong making a story.
Does it have shaky
And that's
cam?
something that's really
Yeah,
hard
but
to
also
do.
not destroy the film in the process. We got 5 minutes.
Yeah, let's.
We gotta keep moving.
Let's rapid fire these. So let's make the questions succinct and we'll kind of get succinct answers. And we can also answer questions in Quills and Sofas or outside the room.
You mentioned comedy as an accessory to a story. What genre would be most difficult to pair comedy with?
Well, tragedy probably only because a lot of people wouldn't really know how to balance it right. Because essentially that turns into black comedy where you're making something comedic out of a horrific situation. So, I mean, there's the story I wrote about it's called Diamond Tiara Hunts Down Systematically Murders Bad OCs. And it's this comedic situation where she's murdering people. Like, she's just viciously hunting these things down. Like, there's a big thing made out of the fear and the terror of it. But it's okay because they're just bad OCs.
I think
So
if
it's this very dark black comedy because it's making light of murder.
Yeah.
I think
that's the kind of thing
if you're intentionally going to try and do a melodrama, that's the most difficult thing to pair, because unless you're doing a satirical, I mean, if you're trying to do melodrama, which, good on you if you want to do it, but melodrama really, really does exist, thrived on an uncompromising attitude of bleakness, and so I think throwing that comedy with that would be really difficult.
Yeah, so like sad or drama fix would definitely have a problem with that.
Okay.
When it comes to like taking comedy to extreme, there's a saying that or tragic comedy rather, there's a saying that if you like slice your finger open with a paper cut, that's tragedy. But if you're like walking down the street on a cell phone, fall down an open well and die, that's hilarious. What are your comments on if that works and why?
Comedy is tragedy plus time.
Yeah.
There's also a certain refuge and audacity that you can have where if you try and present something forcefully enough, then people can accept it as something ridiculous. Like that guy's like, okay, it's like the buddy cop, and the cop is just like, this is my last day, I'm about to retire. Yeah. And have you seen this picture of my kid? And he just keeps going on about all these things, and you're like, you're gonna die, man, stop, stop, you're gonna die. It's like, yeah, and I just paid off my car, and I got a boat. It's like, stop it!
Yeah, that was really,
I just had a kid.
My story was that all of those OCs were 2 days from retirement.
Yes.
All of them?
Yeah, every single one.
Oh, wow. Dang.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
What are the worst jokes you've ever tried to make work?
The what?
The worst jokes we've tried to make work.
I don't know if anyone got it. There was a follow-up I did. It was for the Breezy episode. And I had the guys, of course, I decided they were Scottish just because no one could identify their accent in the 3 hours I had to figure it out. And so I decided I was having one of them yell at each other, and one of the things he yelled in his caption was stuff a stamen in it. And for those of you who may be aware of your plant anatomy, the stamen is the male reproductive portion of a plant, and to date, that's the classiest, most refined dick joke I've ever made. So I don't know if anyone got it, but I was really proud of it.
Every single joke I have ever made is hilarious.
So that joke right there.
That was a joke right there.
Gary he's ascended. He doesn't just make jokes, he is a joke.
Yes.
The problem with identifying bad jokes is that if people don't laugh at them, they might not even notice them. So somewhere in the comments in your story, they'll call out jokes they like, but they probably won't say anything about jokes they didn't like.
How do you make deadpan work in writing? I've very rarely seen it done well.
I have no idea.
Oh, just use periods instead of exclamation marks. And just have the character, just in the narrative, have the character say, absolutely seriously, this. And I've done that plenty of times. Lots of deadpan humor.
Have my voice.
You're the most basic of jokes.
A lot of it is also just, a lot of it is also just Rainbow Dash just saying something ridiculous without realizing it's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, a lot of deadpan, especially in real life, is someone saying it in a very slow, monotone way to avoid saying it in a very emotional way. Like you can see that they're resisting the urge to say it loudly, so they're trying to keep it under control and just say it very quietly. So, I mean, that's really what you have to emphasize, is that they're resisting the urge to not be deadpan, but that's how they, leak it out slowly as opposed to just exploding.
Yeah, I think dialogue sentence structure is a real big one for that. Because if you write your sentence properly, it will read in a deadpan manner. I think we have time for
one more question.
Last question.
Yeah, and again, we'll get Quills and Sofas.
Yes, there is Quills and Sofas down that away and to the left, and we will be there.
So yeah, basic question really. I'm taking something that's usually dark, serious, and very, that's usually kind of on the gorier and violent side, and making it into a twisted joke. How would you go about doing that? In this case, the yandere. Well, not specifically.
Well, you could crank it up to a little bit more ridiculous proportions.
Yeah.
There's like Sin City.
You can either crank it up to be a little more ridiculous to where it's either self-parody or just a complete extreme. But what I did in Doomsday Arcade, which is the most recent, really dark crossover fic, was I got to work with Discord, and that's really fun because he can basically punt heads off of zombies and make golf references, or he can cut off someone's arm and be like, "'Tis but a flesh wound, Sir Arthur." You can just make, with Discord especially, he's obviously the most easy one that you can make references for, but if you can assume that someone has seen the pony equivalent of something, I had him turn into Mr. Freeze from the terrible Batman movie. And Button was like, "Who likes that movie?" And Discord is like, "That is the best form of chaos I have ever seen in a movie. How would you not like that movie?" Just stuff like that.
It was a really cool film, I'll give it that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but gore turning into...
Don't hate on puns. Puns, especially in this fandom. Hey, puns in this fandom have a lot of merit.
Yeah.
No, cut the mic.
All right, with that, we're done. We're done.
Cut the mics, we're done.
And with that, that's the panel. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Killed it.